Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see everyone here in the hall and on the screen outside. Hope everyone is enjoying this beautiful weather, beautiful stretch of weather we're having. We got washed down a couple times this week. That was nice. It's nice when it's followed by some sun. You may have noticed this morning in the dedication of merit for the deceased, the name Hakuryu Sojun Daiyosho. That is Sojun Mel Weitzman Roshi, who's the abbot of Berkeley Zen Center, stepped down the end of last year in his failing health. He passed away last week on Thursday. And I just want to point out his name. He's one of the great Zen masters, teachers of our age, and one of the longest practitioners with an incredible vow to see the Buddha Dharma continue. He was a quiet man, but very, very, very profound. He originally ordained by Suzuki Shunryu Roshi, who was the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center and the various temples like Tassajara, the first Western monastery in our school in North America, Green Gulch Farm, and many, many temples that came out of that lineage. He was one of the people who showed up at Sokoji, which was the name of the Japanese temple, the Japanese American temple in Japantown in San Francisco, where Shunryu Suzuki Roshi showed up as the teacher. He showed up as the abbot. They would have kind of rotating abbottships, and a teacher or would come from Japan, and then they would become the resident priest there for some period of time, and then usually go back to Japan. And when Suzuki Roshi came to San Francisco, it was in the 60s, and many people were interested in, was actually very early 60s, late 50s, don't remember the exact date. People were really interested in meditation. Counterculture things were happening, and so these people started to show up at Sokoji for meditation, and he would greet them every day, twice a day, and they would sit together. And so Mel Weitzman was one of the people who showed up there. He was an artist, a painter, and I was listening to some interviews from him after he passed away, and he said something very interesting. He said, I never wanted to repeat anything. He was like impressionist, is that what you maybe say, impressionist painter? And he says, like, repeating things was like, that was the death nail. I always wanted to be fresh and to be new. And he said that he started sitting with Suzuki Roshi, and he'd do exactly the same thing every day for this practice. And it was like something magical about that changed his viewpoint. Anyway, he practiced with him. He started the Berkeley Zen Center and then was ordained by Suzuki Roshi. After Suzuki Roshi's death, he continued practicing, and really the pillar of that community, especially as San Francisco Zen Center went through some difficult times. Sojun Mel Weitzman Roshi was this constant presence, and he ended up with more than 30 Dharma heirs, 30 teachers, who priests underneath him, which are now heading many, many centers around North America. So it's important for us to recognize our ancestors, even if we don't know too much about them, especially the ones that are close in as they pass, to hold them in to hold them into our heart, and to know something about them that really gives us something. They give us such a gift, and by honoring them, we continue to receive that gift. This morning I would like to talk a little bit about the Bodhisattva vow. You know, this time feels to me like a time of renewal on many different levels. On the calendar level, of course, you know, we're in a new year, so we may be thinking about how am I setting my intention for the year. That's really important. And that might be simple things like get more exercise or eat better, do some more meditation or something like that. These are all, important. We often fail, but I don't think that's exactly the point. The point is the setting of the intention and what we learn from that. It also feels like it's a time of renewal in the political realm. That's not without lots of difficulty and discord, but there is something vibrant afoot. And how is it that we live in that reality? There's the virus and the hope for the end of this era. It seems like an era. It's been about a year. People are starting to get vaccines. I know several people who have gotten their first dose. I don't know anyone who's gotten their second dose yet, but I'm sure there's a few people. And so we're starting to enter into this possibility that we won't have to live like this that much longer. And so that also is a kind of sense of renewal. And in times of renewal, to connect that renewal with our foundational commitments is really important. Not only kind of our, it wouldn't be nice if things were like this, and so I'm going to kind of turn in that direction. Again, those things are fine, but to connect a time of renewal with our very foundational aspirations for this life. This, in Buddhism, we refer to as vow. Okay? To make a resolution, like is very common in New Year's, that is the resolve, right? That's a beginning. But a vow is something which is continually practiced. It's not just having the resolve or the resolution or the intention, but it's setting the intention in such a way that it's practiced. It's setting the intention in such a way that we're carrying out our life in accordance with that direction. So in a way we can say vow is really the center of a life of the Buddha Dharma. To receive the teachings from the Buddha, there's a lot of information there, a lot of practices, a lot of different ways of looking at things. All of them are really in the service of informing our deep intention, of speaking to that place where vow resides, speaking to the place from which we see the world, not just what we see, but the place from which we see the world, the very foundational frameworks within which we go about our day-to-day life. That's why teachings about vow are so powerful, because they touch on that very pivot of how it is that we're living. In one of the central sutras of the Zen school, really the Mahayana Buddhism in general, but particularly in the Zen school, the Diamond Sutra, there's this very interesting question and answer that happens at the beginning of the sutra, where the follower of the Buddha is asking the Buddha, how is it that we should live as bodhisattvas? Right, so I just want to read you that from the sutra. It's a very short sutra. It's not that long, but that's a lot of commentary. The sutra itself is that long. So like all good sutras, there's usually lots of commentary. So it's good for us to read both. But here Subhuti is asking the Buddha. He says, if a noble daughter or son should set forth on the bodhisattva path, how should they stand? How should they walk? And how should they control their thoughts? This translation of Red Pines draws a lot from the Sanskrit. In the Chinese, it sounds something more like where should we abide and how should we control our thoughts? How should we stand? How should we walk? How should we control our thoughts? How should we conduct ourselves? What should we do to be followers of this path? That's what he's asking the Buddha. And the Buddha says something which every time I read it just feels surprising and awesome. He doesn't say, okay, here's the technique. I'm going to tell you how to do it. Okay, you need to do 3 back circles and you spin in the air 4 times and then take this and put it in the ground and do that. He doesn't give those kinds of instructions at all. He doesn't say, light a candle and stare at the flame and hold your mind there until it doesn't move anymore. Right? He doesn't give that kind of yoga. right? He doesn't give any sort of a technique, but it sounds like he might say, follow the rules of discipline, which I've laid out for you, right? He could have said that too, but he doesn't. What he says is Subhuti, those who would now set forth on the Bodhisattva path should thus give birth to this thought. However many beings there are in whatever realms of being might exist, whether they are born from an egg or born from a womb, born from the water or born from the air, whether they have form or no form, whether they have perception or no perception, or neither perception nor no perception, in whatever conceivable realm of being one might conceive of beings. In the realm of complete nirvana, I shall liberate them all. And though I thus liberate countless beings, not a single being is liberated. So he doesn't give Subhuti direction. He doesn't give him the direction in the sense of live your life this way and everything will be okay. Follow these guidelines. He says give birth to a thought. And the thought that you should give birth to is that all beings, no matter how you could conceive of them as a being, right, that you will cross over with them into nirvana. That's how we should stand. That's how we should walk. That's how we should control our thoughts. That's how we should take care of business, is by living like that. Now, the Bodhisattva vows that we chant in part of our service, on Sundays we chant them part of the morning service. On a daily basis at the temple, we chant them as part of the evening service. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma Gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to resolve it or to realize it. So these 4 Bodhisattva vows, we could say, are an expression of this thing that the Buddha in the Diamond Sutra is teaching to Subhuti. Right? And it starts with, beings are numberless, I vow to free them. These are known as the 4 Bodhisattva vows. Now, before I talk about the main thing I want to talk about in relationship with the Bodhisattva vows, I just want to say a couple of things about language. When we translate things from different languages, it's always messy, right? And so this translation was also done by committee, which is pretty amazing. I once tried to translate something. I successfully translated something with my wife. It was a committee of 2, and we agreed that we would never do that again. Was not harmony producing. But this translation we used was actually made by a committee of Soto Zen teachers that came together for a project of translating the core liturgy of our school. And I think it is a good translation. But I want to point a couple things out. When we read this in English, we're bound by the need for subject-object verification because that's how English works, right? There's always a me and a you, and then there's a transitive or an intransitive verb, and how are you acting on each other. Chinese doesn't have all of that, and I'm working with the Chinese when I'm thinking about this. It will have a verb, for example, and you don't know if it's transitive or intransitive. You have to intuit whether the meaning is transitive or intransitive. The thing that's beautiful about that is it can be both transitive and intransitive, or it could be neither transitive or intransitive. There's not always this sense of, is there an agent acting upon an object, right? A subject acting on an object. So these are exactly that way. If you were to read it in Chinese, it's something like beings, numberless, vow, freedom, or vow, crossing over. When you read it in English and you say beings are numberless, I vow to free them, the I am going to free them becomes this relationship of the subject and the object in the transitive verb that goes in between there, right? That's not exactly what it says. So we can be a little more creative with the way that we work with the language. Some people got really stuck on that. There's like, what is about me freeing other beings? Why is it I free them? What's the I and the M? And they get really caught up there. Well, the one way through that I would say is like, well, there's no I in the Chinese, so just forget about it. But for it to work in English, we have to say I. Okay? But I also think it works really well there. That's part of what a vow requires us to do, is to show up. If you're not showing up as an I, you're not vowing. Right? If it's some abstract, there are numberless beings, and I am very committed to them being freed in some way that may or may not include me. Right? That's not a vow. So I actually quite like the way the English requires us to show up. Right? It requires something, which is implied in the Chinese. But here in the English, it's saying, I vow to freedom. I have to take a responsibility for it. So I'm just saying that because I want you can be creative with the language, right? You want to feel into the language and find the nuances and find how it is that it works within your own being. Okay, that being said, one of the things that people come across with the 4 Bodhisattva vows right away, this is almost always the trajectory, is they say, well, it's impossible. Right? Beings are numberless. I vowed to free them. That's impossible. I couldn't do that. How could I do that? I'm just one person. Right? And so from that recognition of the impossibility, very quickly what starts happening is a process of interpretation, a process of, well, let's break the vow down into some realistic goals, right? Like, I'll be nicer to people, like that sounds a little more attainable than I will free all beings. We start to rationalize behavior. We try to make some explanation for, well, it doesn't really mean that you're going to save everybody, but it means we should at least in our heart have the idea that everyone's really important. Right? Now, that trajectory, I'm sort of making light of it here. It's an important trajectory because we have to figure out how are we going to live, right? And a lot of times those questions are about how are we going to live. But it also is kind of giving into your idea that it's impossible. It has a place to interpret in those ways, but it starts to secularize the vow. And what I mean by secularize it here is to rationalize it and to make it something that's relatively safe within our conventional way of looking at the world, our kind of agreed upon consensus reality that we're all here and that we're individual beings and we're doing things and the economy goes up and down and like that, on and on, right? And so if we think about the vow only in that way, there's a kind of limitation which ignores some of the full power that this practice of vow has to offer us. It is impossible. These are impossible with our conventional frame, with the way that we normally look at the world. There's no way that we could free everyone. But the vow, these 4 vows, are asking us to work with that frame itself, to reorganize our deep heart, reforming how we see, not just reforming what we see, but reforming the way in which we conceive of the world. This is why what the Buddha teaches to Subhuti is so powerful. He's not just like, be a do-gooder, Subhuti, be a do-gooder, and then it will, everything will be okay. That's what it means to be a bodhisattva, is to be a do-gooder. He's talking about the deepest levels of heart, the deepest levels of mind. He's talking about a total reformation of the way it is that we see the world and enlightenment. He's teaching them about the bodhisattva path. The bodhi means awakening, sattva means being. He's talking about the path of awakening beings. Right? That's what these vows are about. Now, the way that this shows up in the traditional sutras and traditional records of the teachings of the Buddha in this realm and others is that the bodhisattva vow would be made in the presence of a Buddha. When a bodhisattva comes to the place in their spiritual career where they're saying, I'm no longer interested in just kind of cultivating a better spiritual situation, like using different spiritual practices to kind of, understand more deeply, etc. So this is usually, in this traditional sense, it's usually somebody who is involved in a spiritual life, right? But they come to this inflection point. They come to an inflection point where they say, actually, I have to become a Buddha. I have to vow that I will, like the Buddha of this world did, wake up in such a way that all beings wake up with me. Anything less than that is playing around. If I'm going to be like, okay, these 120 people, these are the people who will wake up. It won't be a complete awakening. I can get rid of most of the delusions. That won't be a complete awakening. So at that point, these bodhisattvas, again, this is in the traditional sutra literature, they make this vow in the presence of a Buddha. And as they make this vow in the presence of a Buddha, the Buddha sees them and knows their future Buddhahood. Because if the intention is clearly set, the result is already accomplished. The result is already there in the intention, the totality of the intention itself. So the Buddha, in their infinite sight, they can see that. And seeing that, they then will tell the assembly what Buddha this bodhisattva will become, right? And the realm that they will establish, in the way in which they will illuminate the world in which they become a Buddha. And the bodhisattva at that point is thought to be in an irreversible stage. They may go through many, many, many lifetimes, millions and millions of lifetimes, but that the millions of those lifetimes are all animated by that vow of total awakening. And so every lifetime will be a lifetime in working through the karma that bodhisattva still has until they can completely wake up. Right? And these are the stories we have about Shakyamuni Buddha, who was a bodhisattva for eons before being born into this world. Now that's the traditional teachings, okay? That's the traditional religious, spiritual, mythological teachings of our tradition. And so as we're working with this vow, we do this. We do this proclaiming. When we're reciting the vow, we're not just saying it so we'll remember it, right? We're not saying it just so that we can memorize it. That can happen fairly quickly. You can memorize what it is. We're not pontificating about it. We're not trying to figure out what the vow is. We are enacting directly that practice of reciting that vow in the presence of a Buddha. That's why the hall is set up the way that it's set up. That's why there is an altar here. That's why there is an icon of the Buddha. That's why there is an assembly of the Buddha's followers, or people who are here to hear the teachings of the Buddha. And then there is this statement. And our Buddhahood is affirmed through that recitation. In a way, we could call this ritual. But I love the word ritual, but I hate using the word ritual in modern North American culture, because when we say ritual, the next word that comes to almost everyone's mind in one way or another is empty. Empty ritual. Like to ritualize something almost always has a negative connotation in the way that we normally use it. It's like you're not actually doing it, you're ritually enacting it. But what I'm saying here is the ritual is the actual. Right? The ritual is not like a poor substitute for doing it, right? You're just sort of going through the motions because you can't do the real thing. I'm saying that this vow we can actually take by reciting it in the presence of the Buddha. We can actualize this vow. The full faculty of our heart has to be brought if we are to work with the vow in this way. If we go the route of saying, well, it's impossible, and let me kind of figure out what's a practical form of the vow, again, which I think has some merit, but it misses this other thing, right? It misses this thing where I say, no, this isn't about the compromise. This isn't about the conventional way of looking at the world as being what's real, and I'm going to kind of take any inspiration I have and try to fit it into my conventional way of looking at the world. I'm going to flip that on its head. I'm going to say, there is a Buddha here. My capacity to see the Buddha or not to see the Buddha is not change the presence of the Buddha. The Buddha's presence is everywhere. So if I'm going to say these words in the presence of the Buddha, I can actually say them anywhere. But I have to say them with the conviction that I'm saying them in the presence of a Buddha. The Buddha that surrounds me, the Buddha that lives right here in my being. So it can be challenging in this way, all right? I hope this is challenging you a little bit in the sense of like, I thought I was coming to the rational religious congregation. When we take this kind of movement, when we don't think of ritual as just being some kind of empty enactment or some kind of thing where we're just trying to repeat something to brainwash ourselves or to brainwash others, but we enact it, we care for it as an instance of this thing which is presented to us in the sutras, is presented to us in the mythology of our religious tradition. That happens in all kinds of realms. There are beings that are constantly doing this, saying, no, I'm not going to live my life in that kind of cut-up way. I'm going to dedicate myself to the whole thing. Wonderful qualities emerge. They emerge through ourself, but they also emerge through the world. So taking that vow, treating it seriously, reciting that vow, giving birth to that vow, caring for that vow in the presence of a Buddha, right? Not only does the quality of how we are in the world change, but the way the world is also changes. The way we see the world changes. The very set frames of how it is that we're encountering things are shaken by that kind of a practice. And those wonderful qualities that are in the world and those wonderful qualities that can emerge through beings, they're not two. Right? It's not like, oh yeah, I took that vow, now I'm the superhero Bodhisattva. And the rest of the world's kind of messed up and I'm going to save it. It's like we start seeing that the movement of my own heart and the movement of the world are not really different things. There are no beings that are saved. I have to vow to save every being. But no being is saved because there's no separate being. Right? And that the saving is right there in the no separate being. Now, I'm describing here the practice which we take up by recitation, but this is also the core practice of Zazen. Zazen is not just mindfulness practice. Zazen is not just like trying to get your heart in shape or your mind in shape. That's a side of it. Again, it has some importance. But Zazen is a direct instance of this Bodhisattva vow. Within our school, we say is the most direct way to enact this Bodhisattva vow. Is the unleveraged and open field of upright sitting, which is not bound to sitting. What I mean by that is as we sit, our whole life is involved. And you can feel that when you sit down for meditation. Like it shows up as all the thoughts, maybe the regrets, maybe the hopes, memories, flashes of this, flashes of that. The wholeness of your life is right there. And the more that you pull out your addiction to time, the more that you You throw out the kind of keeping track of, I wonder how long it's been, I wonder how long we've been setting, da-da-da-da. The more you throw those things out, the more you can just feel the wholeness of your life right there. So as you sit upright and you feel the wholeness of your life, as you get up from the cushion, it's not as if Zazen ended. It's not as if the vow ended, right? It is just the vow, the activity of the day-to-day. And then the sitting down is the vow. It doesn't start or stop. And Zazen is beyond sitting, but also is enacted through sitting, as the vow is enacted through this recitation of the vow in the presence of a Buddha. So yes, there is a trap in this. We can convince ourselves of something and just keep telling ourselves again and again and again and again and again and again, and create a little world of our own thinking. Exhibit A is, this isn't a religious example, but weapons of mass destruction. They never found any in Iraq, if you hadn't heard. 80% of Americans believe that they did. Why? Because our president used that term over and over and over and over and over again. So there is a danger in just, I'm encouraging you to believe in something and to say it over and over and over again. So the danger here is that you just create a kind of like small world of your own idea and you hide in it. But the antidote to such a poison is already contained within these vows. Because beings are numberless, delusions are inexhaustible, Dharma Gates are boundless, and the Buddha way is unsurpassable. So it means that no matter what I'm meeting, I can't shut it out. Whatever being I'm meeting, I can't say, wait a minute, my story is like this, so I'm going to stay inside of that story, which is the problem with that when we just create a story and stay in it just in our own being and don't look at the rest of the world. These vows say no matter what being shows up, they've got to be included in the vow. Right? Pulls you out of your little idea. Right? Delusions are inexhaustible. I am a fountain of delusion. How do I face that? There are unbelievable number of gates which I can pass through in studying the Dharma. No matter what shows up to me, it is opportunity to learn. Right? And the unsurpassability of the Buddha way means that I can't just attain it. I can't just work really hard and get to this place. It doesn't reside in this very top place. Right? It resides everywhere. And so if I'm going to realize that, I have to realize it in every action, not just in actions that take me to being, the superhero. So if we practice this way, if we're going to take up this kind of ritual, this kind of direct enactment, this thing where we trust something that is beyond our normal way of seeing the world, we had better make sure that the thing that we are going to trust in that way has the medicine inside of it. Because if it doesn't, then we just go down this dangerous path. So that's for you to examine. That's for you to consider and to find your own connection with vow. Whether that is these Bodhisattva vows as they're formulated or it takes another shape. That's where this work of connecting the renewal and the foundational can happen together. And then I guarantee you will lose the 40 pounds. For me, it's 40. I don't know what it is for you. I have quite a bit of extra. So. You don't have any questions or comments?
Hey, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been curious about the form that the Buddha's answer takes, that it includes the words give rise
Yeah.
to a thought. Why doesn't he simply say, you should think, or you should have a thought?
Yeah, this is so there are different translations, but that aside, I'm very fond of I'm very fond of that phrasing, give rise to the thought. And it relates to a way that we think about the bodhicitta, which is the mind of awakening. That it's not just something that we have, but it's something that we have to learn to rely on, and learning to rely on it, that it then comes forward. So it's not just that we want to hold our mind in a certain shape of a thought, but that we actually want to give rise to a way of liberating. When so much of you think about like a thought, you think, formulate this shape in your head. And this is slightly different than that. It's like actually unformulate the shapes in your head so that this mind of awakening can move in the dynamic way that it does. So that's why I like that phrasing. Hi.
On the first of the Eightfold Path, right view,
Yeah.
what relationship does that have with the Bodhisattva vows?
That's a very good question. The right view usually refers to how it is that we think about the world. So I should view things in the right way, and then viewing things in the right way, I can come to act in the right way. That's a kind of formulation within the Eightfold Path. So in a real kind of grounded sense, to understand what's happening within those vows. Why do we vow to liberate all beings? Why is that so important? Well, the viewpoint that's behind that is that there's no such thing as a separate being. There's no way for me to liberate Kogen apart from liberating myself, apart from liberating Shanae, right? That liberation is all tied together. So if we go into that, we can start honing our view. So in this case, I'm talking about the view of dependent origination, that all things arise dependent on each other. We can see that if we're not seeing the world that way, we're always caught in the subject-object split. And that subject-object split is one of the foundational ways that we ignore other beings, and we don't care for them in the way that the Bodhisattva is pledged to caring for them. So those kind of jewels can come from this practice, and it can be very even kind of intellectual. What is the setup? What is the framework of how I'm looking at things? I would say that one of the differences within Buddhism to some approaches, though, is what we'll always have our eye on is the kind of fancy word for it would be soteriological quality of the teaching. And what that means is like the ability for it to help people. It's not like we don't have some other like framework of testing whether it's true or not. The framework we have for testing whether something is a true teaching is whether it liberates or not. It's the liberating capacity is what shows a teaching as being true, not that we could prove it empirically or something like that. So when we're honing our view, we always have to be looking at how are beings freed and developing our understanding accordingly.
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
Let's see if I can explain this. So it's a little extreme. So for having anger against somebody, for instance, like if you watch the news and Donald Trump, or for instance, it's even more extreme. I would look at the man that murdered my best friend, right? So I don't like them, but there's something behind that. That like the guy that did murder my friend, I have forgiven him and long moved past and actually realized that I think what you're saying is like I have to even though I don't like him, but there's something that still shines that allows me to keep my friend alive in my heart.
Yeah.
The same when I see Donald Trump and the things that are going on in the world. When I look past, or not past, but when I awaken to, I think what you're talking about, I that no longer the delusion or my vision of what I think or I don't like, kind of just goes away.
Yeah.
I don't know. I try to look at it as in what happened in my life, but for some reason, those things don't drive me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I even know that the whole world and my whole world has been shaken by these things.
Yeah.
But there's some calm, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think this is a really important facet of investigating the vow. There's a sweet surface level of the vow where we're like, okay, beings are numberless, I vow to free them. I'll be really nice to everybody. I love Eugene about that way. You know, like people smile at you. You know, like you're other places and you're like, it just feels a little rough, and you come back to Eugene and you're going across the crosswalk and you happen to catch someone's eye and they smile, you know, and you smile. And it's like, oh wow, I love Eugene. But, I mean, it can get a little old, but, you know, that kind of surface level is, well, it has some meaning, but it's not, what are we talking about here? We're talking about freeing beings. When we come across a very difficult being, what is our orientation to them? Do we think there's a place that we could put them that would be separate from everything else? Where would they go? And even, you know, like killing someone, the karma of that being doesn't end with their death. So we know all the tendrils. You can't. There's no place to put a problematic being. So our vow there has to not be a vow of trying to see them as unproblematic. Them not being a problem is not the measure of what it means for them to be free. For them to be free means for them to become a Buddha.
Yes.
Right? And so that whole dance that we do with trying to hope they will become better people or something is not really, it doesn't hold much water in this case. We have to look at something more fundamental. You know, and then can we start seeing the suffering that goes into a life in which someone would murder another person? And the layers start to reveal themselves. There is a deep, there's a very profound turning of our own heart when we start seeing beings, you know, through that process of seeing more deeply into them. So their freeing is not just about their freedom, it's about our freedom too. Are we going to be stuck in that or not? So, you know, it sounds like you have found a way with that is, you know, about your vow.
And Joe,
Hi.
I really appreciate what you said at the very beginning about the language, because I think it's a very Western way, like you said about being me and a them. And in Asian language, there's a non-emphasis on the individual,
Right.
and it's all about the larger group.
Yeah.
So in that context, it's I think it helps to get less stuck on yourself as being the person who's gonna free everybody,
Yeah.
and more able to see it as you're just part of this eternal overarching everything. And to recognize that is to simultaneously recognize that what you do affects everybody, and what everybody affects you, and it's not. And so it's easier to shed your ego and your whatever about everything, and just I don't know, recognize the connectedness of everything.
Yeah, I once heard it was a kind of formal question and response, Shosan. I can't remember if I saw it or I read it. Anyway, I'm getting to that point where those things are all mixing up in my head. But the questioner had asked, we vow to free all beings. What do we free them from? And the response was, well, I free them from myself. You know, which I thought was hilarious. I mean, it's a good answer on these very subtle levels, but I thought it was also hilarious. Like I'm freeing them from me. We always think I'm going to free them from the other stuff, right? The I and the them, those are the really solid things. Then all the other stuff they're going to get freed from. But what if you thought about freeing them from you? Yeah, I think that's a really important aspect. One thing that I had also mentioned how I do appreciate the I being there, and the way that I appreciate it is there's also a way in which the wholeness, I experience this in Japan a lot, where it's a very group-oriented society, so people are very ready to give up the I for the quality of the group, which has so many good qualities. It also can turn into what Sawaki Kodo Roshi referred to as group bokeh, which is a group, bokeh is like when you start to lose your mental faculties. It's like as you get older, that's called bokeh. And you don't have to get older to do that, right? But bokeh is the Japanese word for it. So group bokeh, he would call it. Like people just have this group think. Maybe that's what we would call it here, group think. And so then that place where an individual's movement in the thing can't, the culture has a harder time allowing that to feed something back into the group situation. So there's some strength, I think, to having the I there, but like everything, kind of cuts both directions.
Yeah. Thank you.
When the sixth creature heard the Diamond Sutra chant and then he awakened, was that the vow of that monk fruitioning itself?
Oh, the vow of the sixth ancestor was that his awakening was that the fruition of the vow that he had made?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or from the person who he heard it chanting.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Yeah, undoubtedly. And whether it is, you can't contain the vow inside of him, and you can't maintain the vow inside of the teacher who was reciting, the fifth ancestor. It's not containable in that way. But certainly those turnings are the fruition of the vow. All awakening is. There's no awakening without the vow. But it's not apparent in that we can't trace it like we can't say, oh, I see it was like this and then this and this and this and this. That vow, is how many lifetimes ago that he had learned to rely on. And you can see, we don't have to look just for a rarefied kind of understanding about this vow. In fact, I would say that taking up the ritual of the vow opens us to seeing the vow in all kinds of places, not just the rarefied instances of the vow. You'll see it in the way that people take care of each other in just the simplest way. You know that age where kids start putting food in your mouth? Oftentimes think about that. It's one of the most magical things. When they get just to where they're kind of mobile enough and you've been feeding them and they're eating something, and then they'll just, it's somewhere kind of between 1 and 2, I think usually. They'll pick things and they want to put it in your mouth. And I oftentimes think about that. Where's that come from? One way to explain it, we could have kind of sociological or psychological analysis. They see you putting things in other people's mouth and they're mimicking you and da 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 da. And we could explain it that way, and that probably is true. But I also think there's this other way in our exploration of vow. There's something about that capacity. There's something about early humans that we now are finding remains, that they cared for people who were disabled or elderly. There's something deep in our spirit. This vow has been cultivated for a long time, and it didn't start with Shakyamuni Buddha.